Hello, Wichita. I am here with someone very special today, Joseph Shepard. Hi, Joseph. How you
I'm
doing?
doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. My name's Kyle Ritterbush, and I'm interviewing Joseph today about something very important. As many of you know, there is a citywide proposal that we are voting on March 3rd, a 1% sales tax. And there's been a lot of heated discussion about this topic. Oh, have you seen some of that
I've
discussion,
seen a
Joseph?
little bit
A
of it.
little bit?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you're right. It has been a heated, spirited discussion about it.
Absolutely. It involves the future of Wichita, the future of a lot of the things that many of us consider important to the community.
That's right.
So I'm glad we're able to have this discussion. The goal of this video interview is to explain what the sales tax is, some of the concerns, and what happens if we do or do not pass this initiative. So, with that out of the way, let's get right into it about what we are actually voting on.
That's right.
So, would you like to describe some of the terms, conditions, the fine print of what this sales tax entails?
Yeah. So, a sales tax, the easiest way that I can put it, it's going to be 1 cent on every dollar that you spend over the course of 7 years. So, it will expire after 7 years. You'll hear people say sunset. That's just a fancy word for expire.
Mhm.
And those dollars that are collected through the sales tax will go to, as you mentioned, some pretty important things that are on the hearts and minds of Wichitans right now.
Mhm.
Homelessness and making sure that the operations for Second Light continue, which is our multi-agency center that serves our unhoused neighbors year round. It will also include $10 million going into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund over the course of 7 years. That housing trust fund is going to be able to provide rent assistance for folks who are struggling to pay rent. It's going to be able to help provide down payment assistance for folks who want to own their home for the first time.
Yeah.
It's also going to go to some public safety, CIP, or infrastructure improvements for our fire and police department to help catch up on some of the infrastructure and apparatus that is currently been deferred and delayed for far too long, in my opinion.
Mhm.
It's also going to address the convention side of things. So, Century 2, Bob Brown Expo Center, as well as a Performing Arts Center, will be a part of where some of those dollars go. And then, last but certainly not least at all, is the property tax relief
Mhm.
that we know that a lot of homeowners are feeling. And I'm particularly concerned about seniors, those who are
Yeah.
operating on fixed income, and working class families getting that property tax relief.
Absolutely. And we're going to dive into those a little more specifically here. So basically, the sales tax that's being proposed is there's like five buckets
Yep.
that are capped at a certain amount of money. So we're going to go through each of those, talk about what that money would provide, and then what the issue is that it is solving, and maybe even talk about what issues would remain if we don't address
Yep.
these. So the first one is a public safety fund of 225 million. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
Okay, so talk about some of the public safety initiatives that this money is hoping to address and maybe some concerns on what may happen if they aren't addressed soon.
So these are the items that are currently in the capital improvement plan, and the CIP. There's no money or cash attached to it. Typically, it's just pretty much a task list. Say you're going to the grocery store
Mm,
and you have a certain limited budget, and you say these are the priorities in which we want to try to get some of these things out of the grocery store. Very similar to the CIP list, right? And so a
mhm,
lot of people think that we are already allocating money to the things that are in the CIP list.
mhm.
It's more so like planning ahead. So you want to plan before you go to the grocery store so you know what you're getting. The problem is that that's based on the budget, right?
Yeah.
And the budget isn't always set up in a position year after year where you're able to do a lot of those things that are in the CIP. So, what will these dollars do? These dollars will make sure that we're catching up on the things that have been delayed for far too long, in my opinion,
Mhm.
particularly fire
Yeah, talk
stations.
about that. I heard
Mhm.
some talk about like some fire stations that either needed remodeling or even like completely new ones. Maybe talk about that.
Yes. So let's talk about the remodeling. I believe infrastructure has a shelf life, and I
Mhm.
think that everything you should be taking care of, every piece of infrastructure you should be taking care of. I relate it to kind of like I'm a shoe guy. I love
Yeah.
my shoes. I love my Jordans. I love my Dunks.
Yes, sir.
But to make sure I get the most life out of those shoes, I keep them in the box. I clean them periodically because eventually there's going to be some wear and tear. I'll have to replace
Absolutely.
the shoes.
Can't
But
crease the
that's
shoes.
right. Can't crease the shoes, but I also have to do my due diligence to get the most life out of it.
Mhm.
That's very similar to the infrastructure issue that our fire stations are dealing with. There has been deferred and delayed maintenance for far too long. And so now they are in a condition that, in my opinion, are inhumane. The people who are putting their lives on the line, saving people out of fires, protecting our community, they're sleeping in stations where there are broken windows, where mold is
Yeah.
probably in those positions. And so these dollars will be able to help us address the deferred maintenance. But the second part of it, to your point, building new.
Mhm.
We have grown dramatically as a city. We have
Absolutely.
expanded. And so if you look at a map of the city of Wichita and you put the places where fire stations are currently located, you will find that there are some areas in Wichita where there is not a fire station within close proximity. What does that do? It delays how quickly our firefighters can get to a fire. The average time that a firefighter should show up at a fire is about 4 minutes.
Mhm.
And we're running really close to that. And so this is a matter of life or death. And we need to be able to build the infrastructure to support our growing population at the same rate that our population is growing.
Absolutely. And so I think that's a very important one. And this next one I think is equally important to a lot of people, which is the homeless and housing services that you kind of alluded to earlier. So there's already been some progress made in this arena, but it sounds like there might be some tax dollars or grant money that's running out soon that we need to replace for Second Light. So first, talk about how successful has Second Light been to the community, why it needs this funding, and what that would do for the city.
Yeah, so we have seen an uptick in our unhoused neighbors. And I want to be very clear. When we talk about our unhoused neighbors, I think people put in their mind a particular profile of a person that is
Absolutely.
unhoused. But the reality is that there are people, particularly who are living paycheck to paycheck, that are
Yes.
just one paycheck away from being needed to be served by Second Light, which is our multi agency center as a city that
Mhm.
serves our unhoused year round. And so we were able to create Second Light through ARPA dollars. Those were dollars given during COVID-19. A lot of folks might be familiar with COVID-19 relief funds.
Yeah.
We as a city decided to invest in the multi agency center. We worked with our public schools. We purchased Park Elementary, which was a former school that USD 259 closed. And so you might imagine that there's a lot of renovations and work that needed to be done to
Mhm.
get that facility up to the standard to operate
Mhm.
a housing shelter for our unhoused neighbors. So the dollars are running out in September, as all
Mhm.
COVID-19 dollars do. They need to be spent by a particular time.
Yeah.
So that means that we have to continue to look at how are we going to operate that facility long term, not just over the next year. So the sales tax dollars will go into an endowment fund to help ensure the longevity of that operations, regardless of who's your council member, who's your mayor, regardless if we have 700 folks who need those services or 200 folks, whether we're at functional zero or not. That is going to be the opportunity to make sure that it's sustainable and
Mhm.
it's around.
And talk about some of these services from the standpoint of, there's some people that may say, "Hey, these people that we're serving, you know, they should really just, pull themselves up by the bootstraps." That's a
Mhm.
common phrase. Talk about how it's actually cheaper for the city to spend money on these services than to have them out on the street or in their cars. Talk about some of that.
That's right. So I'll give a great example. So when Second Life first opened, there were a lot of calls happening with our EMS and firefighters going to Second Life facility, particularly not from our unhoused neighbors that were staying at the Second Life facility, but maybe within the area. And what I can tell you is that for every single call, that's about $500.
Mhm.
That's $500 of taxpayer money that is happening because maybe an unhoused person is calling because they just need something minute, something small, something minor. Maybe they just need to be eased. Maybe they need mental health support. Maybe they need case management support. Maybe they need to be directed to a housing services
Like Second Light.
like Second Light. That's
Mhm.
right. But $500 per call adds up very quickly. But not only that, it puts a strain on our public safety
Absolutely.
resources that we need out on the street handling matters that where violent crime is prevalent. And so that is why it's important to invest in this on the front end instead of looking at being reactive instead of proactive, because we
Mhm.
actually not only save taxpayer dollars, we get these people the help that they need.
Mhm.
Um, the number one solution to moving someone out of shelter is housing, which is
Yeah.
why, in addition to making sure that we invest in an endowment fund for Second Light, we're also investing in the Housing Affordable Trust Fund because that is going to allow us to invest in transitional housing, permanent housing, and be able to provide folks who may not own a home, like me, I'm a renter, with
Mhm.
rental assistance if they fall on hard times to avoid them from ever needing to walk through the second light doors.
Yes, those are very important programs. And so some of these next ones are a bit optional, but things that the community has voiced some support for.
Mhm.
And so the first one's going to be the Century 2 Convention Center Fund, which I think is about 250 million
Yep,
total. Okay.
225 million, I believe, is for the convention center funds.
Okay. Perfect. So talk about that a little bit. Talk about maybe how that would help expand our economy and some of the benefits that that would bring to Wichita.
So when we're talking about a sales tax, we also have to talk about who pays that sales tax.
Absolutely.
And of course, again, I made it very clear you will spend a penny for every dollar you spend. But we also need to recognize that 30% of the folks who will buy into that sales tax are it's generated through tourism. And
Yeah.
so I think if we are going to have a sales tax, then we definitely need to make sure that we're investing in what drives the tourism to our region and
Yeah.
to our city. And that is the performing arts and that is convention.
Hmm.
And so this is going to allow us to not only address the deferred maintenance in Century 2 and
Hmm.
the Bob Brown Expo Center, but that in return is going to allow us to bring in better shows. It's going to allow our nonprofit arts community to be able to utilize Century 2 more
Hmm.
frequently. And it's also going to allow us to attract better and more convention, which is a generator right now for our economy. And expanding that is only going to be able to enhance that economic driver.
Awesome. And I think that's a great example of, how we can actually get money back potentially from this sales tax in the long term through things that we invest in that help generate revenue. Now, what's important to a lot of people you brought up is property tax.
Yes.
So talk a bit about what that journey has been over the last, maybe 12 months to already kind of bring some reductions to that, and then what we plan to do with this additional 150 million that
Mhm.
we're hoping to generate from this.
So prior to my time on city council did vote to lower the mill levy. I did not agree with that then.
Hmm.
It saved the average homeowner, I believe, about $14 a year in property tax relief. And it was something, but I don't think it was enough. And
Hmm.
I will tell you, this is probably one of the buckets that I really struggled with
Hmm.
at first. And always open to spirited debate to talk
Yeah.
about property tax relief. But I remember going to a renters' rights meeting, and I remember hearing from elderly in our community, seniors who said, I'm on a fixed income and I'm one paycheck away or one appraisal away or one property tax hike away from being in my car. And that really set in on my heart and my mind. And so this is going to be able to particularly help move, what was just a 14 average amount a year property tax relief to increase that. So that way there is still some relief. What we also did attach to that guardrail was also in addition to the property tax relief that we're going to allocate, I believe it's 150 million.
Hmm.
We're also going to reduce about a 4 mil reduction, which will also provide additional assistance for those who are property tax owners to feel a little bit of that relief. There's a new performing arts facility,
Yes.
about 50 million, I believe we voted to put towards it.
And 25 million is needed from private capital?
Yep, we are requiring that the private sector assists with the fundraising
Mhm.
before we give any of
Yeah.
those dollars to the new performing arts facility. And, there's a very healthy conversation going on right now with those in the arts community that new facilities will not solve the problem. We have to create a stronger ecosystem to figure out
Yeah.
how we support artists at all levels. And
Yeah.
I completely agree. I also think that this is one step in the right direction, making sure that we are building the infrastructure that aligns with the world class talent that we have in our city to honor their worth and their value and attract more shows to our community as well.
Yeah, that's super important. Now, here comes the harder part of the conversation, which
Yeah.
is a lot of the concerns and issues that people may have with either some of the buckets or some of the ways that this process has been handled.
Hmm.
So first, we're going to talk about the form that this is coming in, which is the sales tax.
Hmm.
At a technical level, it is somewhat regressive.
No doubt. There's no question. It 100% is a regressive tax. And
Hmm.
as someone who loves the working class, am a part of the working class, will fight for the vulnerable in the working class, it would be a disservice for me to not acknowledge that this is a regressive tax.
Absolutely. And as people are living paycheck to paycheck, trying to make ends meet, what are some of the ways that maybe either this sales tax would still either benefit them or that the city's going to offer assistance to potentially help these people if we end up passing this?
Absolutely. Great question. So, one, we are looking at relief, right? The tax on groceries is very
Yeah.
hard on everybody.
How's that
And
going at the state level, by the
you
way?
know, it may or may not be passed this session.
Hmm.
I'm leaning towards it may not be because
Okay.
it is an election year and there are lots of things happening in Topeka right now. I would argue that the bills that I've seen focus on out of Topeka are not bills that I think help address the needs of working class families and
I
families in
agree.
general, regardless of partisanship. I
Yeah.
don't think that whoever you are, Republican or Democrat, independent or unaffiliated, we're not concerned about bathrooms.
Yeah.
We're concerned about making sure that we're able to have access to groceries without paying tax. We want property tax relief. We want to make sure that we're living in a community where the quality of life is strong. And that is across the partisan spectrum. But what we are doing, regardless of if that passes or not, is making sure that we do a rebate. So if you qualify for the water reuse program, we will give you relief that way through a rebate as well
I
as the
have
Homestead Act.
$55 a year written down. Is that
That
accurate?
is accurate.
Okay, so $55 a year, which helps should cover that, and maybe even beyond the 1% for
Mhm.
people that need it the most.
That's right.
And is this an efficient use of, maybe a rebate program, or are there other ways that maybe the city council is thinking of potentially helping?
We also will look at the Homestead Act, which will particularly help offset property taxes and or bring some relief for seniors, veterans, those with disabilities, as well as those who qualify for LEAP, which is the energy assistance. If you qualify for that, looking at providing a rebate or some form of relief there
Mhm.
too.
Has anyone in the city thought of something a little bit more of a progressive tax, something a different way of raising these funds? Have any of those discussions been had? If so, what are some of those options potentially, especially if this tax doesn't go through, because that is a real possibility.
Yeah, it is a real possibility. And I have been a vocal proponent from the bench of saying to the city manager that we need a contingency plan. So we do have a council retreat scheduled for March 12th and March 13th. It will be open to the public, but that is our opportunity, whether the tax passes or fails, to talk about what comes next.
Yeah,
I think we've learned a lot through this process. And I think one of the things, should it pass, we have to talk about is what does it look like to meaningfully build a trustworthy process to earn the trust of the community. If it fails, it looks like how do we meet the needs that are still outlined in this sales tax proposal? Because what I have been seeing from those who say vote no and those who vote yes, the correlating theme is that they all agree that these are things we should be talking about, investing in, and paying attention to. So how do we get there?
absolutely. And I'm glad, the community agrees on a lot of these things. We just have different ways of
Yep,
getting to that
that's
goal.
right.
And so one of the ways we could potentially do that, and I wanted to bring up is it possible to in the future separate these initiatives with either different proposals, smaller sales taxes, different types of taxes to attack these one at a time? Because right now it's basically an all or nothing bill, which means it's a lot of money that needs to be raised, which means some of it may not get uh, taken in at all, especially for some of these important programs like public safety
Mhm.
and homelessness that I'm sure a lot of people would be willing to support at a lower price.
Yeah. Well, it takes four to get anything done, and I don't think we have the four to bring a sales tax back forward. I think for many reasons. For me, I can only speak for me. I think that the community has been clear. They want to be a part of that process. And I think we would need to look at what does a healthy process look like when we talk about a sales tax, even if they are for separate items or we parse it out and folks can vote on the ones they want and dismiss the ones they do not want. I still think we have to have a bigger conversation about what it looks like to reconcile and heal. There's been a lot of things happening in these conversations that lead me to believe that people are hurt. And when we talk about development deals that have gone bad 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 5 years ago, prior to my time on the council and many of the folks up there, that means to me that there's some deeper rooted mistrust that we have to address before we talk about a sales tax. The easiest thing to do if this fails is look at raising the mill levy. And I know that doesn't feel good to a lot of people to
Yeah.
say. My predecessor was a staunch advocate for raising the mill levy, and he was a consistent vocal proponent of saying if we do not raise the mill levy, we will get to a point where we'll have to do something. And what we will have to do will not be comfortable for those of us who care about the vulnerable and the working class, but it is going to be something necessary that we were going to have to do to meet the moment and meet the need.
Yeah.
Here we are. He foreshadowed that a year ago, and here we are. So I think the easiest thing to do would be to work with my colleagues to figure out if we can get to 4 to raise the mill levy.
And I think we'll talk about it again in a bit towards the end when we talk more about the future. There's still plenty of concerns to go over. The
That's
next
right.
one, you kind of hinted at it, is the city accountability. So
Mhm.
I want to talk about how residents can be sure that this money is going to be going to the correct buckets. We're not going to be wasting a penny on anything that doesn't need to be spent on. Money's not going to be shifted around to be used for whatever the city council 4 years from now may decide upon. Like, how is this going to be consistent?
You know, I want to address that the concerns about guardrails being able to be overturned is a true statement that a lot of folks who are vote no or concerned have mentioned. I will also tell them that every ordinance and resolution that is passed within the local municipality is the same way, and there are many ordinances and resolutions that have been on the books since the beginning of time that are honored. And there are even charter ordinances that can still be overturned. And so that's
Mhm.
the way the democracy works. I think the level of accountability is in your vote, right? Understanding that you need to vote for people and support people who are going to listen to the will of the body. And in the case that they do not respect or listen to the larger will of the body, how does that person mobilize their opinion? That's what
Mhm.
I've been out here doing. I've been engaging and I've been in the arena when people ask me questions about why I did not vote to delay this to August, and I've shared that explanation. I hope that that shows a level of trust that even when we disagree with each other, we are still going to be able to sit down and have a conversation. I'm not going to just give you the cold shoulder, right? We need every leader, not just in the city of Wichita, but at all elected positions being able to come to the table. But one of the strongest accountabilities that we have in this is the oversight committee that will be comprised of community.
Yes, talk about all of those because I heard that there's gonna be community boards, subcommittees even for
Yep.
all these buckets. Go into that whole process because I think that's gonna be essential to the success of the sales tax.
100%. And this oversight committee and the strengthening of the oversight committee came as a result of concerns that we were hearing from folks who are still on the vote no side. And we included those things in the oversight committee. I advocated from the bench for those amendments because I think it's important to meet people where they are. That's how you
Mhm,
build trust. So 15-member committee, each council member will be able to appoint someone to the committee that has to be represented from their particular council district
mhm,
to ensure that the geographic diversity is there. We will then have folks applying, and then we will select those folks through that application process, and they'll be voted on and they'll be brought up from the bench. And so the
mhm,
public will be fully aware. We also, I believe, are having housing and public safety, and I believe the continuum of care will be represented on that board as well. But underneath that 15-member committee, we will also have subcommittees. So if you care about convention and performing arts, there will be a subcommittee for you. And that's where I'm really hoping our experts in this city will say, we know how to do this. We know how to get it done. We know
absolutely.
what the gaps are. Let's work to fill them. And we'll have subcommittees for public safety. We'll have subcommittees for convention. We'll have subcommittees for homelessness services because we really have to lean on our experts. Our job as a council is to govern. We are not the experts in these
Absolutely,
fields. So
and
we need
people
to be
miss
work.
that a lot.
That's right. And it's my philosophy, and I think it's a culture shift.
Mhm.
But you know, if someone asks me what are we going to do in the area of small business, I'm going to say, well, let me go and talk to someone who has some experience in operating a small business. And then I'm going to work with them to maybe craft a policy that meets the need. There's a difference between governing and being an expert in these respective fields.
And that's such a valuable trait because oftentimes we expect our politicians to be experts, or the politicians will pretend to be experts in
That's
something
right.
that they are not an expert on, particularly healthcare or economics, all these different areas.
That's
And
right.
so I really respect that. One potential concern is there going to be any people on the Yes campaign that could potentially become part of these boards? Could that be a conflict of interest? Is there any sort of degree of separation there to ensure some, separation from biases?
Yeah, so when it comes to the board, we have not exempt folks who were pro or against from serving. In fact, there are several folks who are leading the Vote No campaign at the top of that campaign that I know council members have engaged about potentially serving on the oversight committee. And the same will be true for Vote Yes. They clearly are passionate about this cause, regardless of the side that they're on. And we would welcome them to the table to assess if their voice and their passions are best suited for this oversight committee.
And I wanted to kind of bring up the Yes campaign because there's been some concerns on that side, and then I wanted your opinion on if voters should be concerned about how to vote based on these issues. But the first one being that there was a campaign ad that went out from one of the consulting firms aligned with this group, calling no voters communist,
Yeah.
basically, and
Yeah.
that was pretty unfortunate. Should
Yeah.
that concern voters at all?
I think that any process that is not a trustworthy process, voters have a right to question it,
Mhm,
right? We earn trust through the trustworthiness of our processes. I also acknowledge that the leaders of that Vote Yes campaign came out and apologized, took ownership, and mentioned that it was not okay. And I think that that also says a lot too.
mhm,
The ad was wrong.
mhm.
Folks who reject this sales tax are not communists.
Yeah.
They're exercising their right within their democracy. And that is what we need. And
Mhm.
we can have spirited debate, but we should not be calling people names. And
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
when rage turns into um, when it gets to a space where we just have an inability to have a healthy discussion, that is not okay.
Absolutely.
These are real issues and we have to sit down and talk about them. But on the vote yes side, we can't call people communists. On the vote no side, we can't say that people supporting this don't care about the vulnerable and the working class.
Mhm.
Both are wrong, and we have got to stop the name calling.
You brought it up earlier is everyone in Wichita cares about Wichita,
That's right.
and it's just a simple disagreement on how we get Wichita to succeed, so I'm glad we're having this conversation.
Mhm.
Again, back to Wichita Ford, there are some people on part of the Wichita Ford campaign that are, developers, commercial developers, all that,
Yeah.
that could potentially, you know, their companies could benefit if they are selected to build some of these CIP projects and convention projects. What is the system going to be like if the sales tax goes through to ensure an unbiased pick for some of these developments to go through?
Yeah, so our purchasing and bids process that is already in place has very strong policies in place that will not allow preferential treatment to anyone. We do not have a local preference in that contracting and bidding as well. And so, what that means is if someone from Wichita, one of these companies that you mentioned that's represented on the Vote Yes side, even if they were local and, had the best packaging, there's going to have to be more that goes into why we select them.
Yeah.
I will also mention this that I believe. I know folks on the vote no side personally. I know folks on the vote yes side personally,
Hmm.
and I do know the three men leading the vote yes, or at the top of the vote
Hmm.
yes side. And I will tell you that one of them has already said that they came out publicly and has said they're not interested in getting any loans or any parts of buying into this because they have special treatment.
Hmm.
But they've also been working with the city. I will tell you, one of them has on how can they take those savings from property tax relief that they might see and invest in rebate and relief programs.
Hmm.
Outside of that, again, I understand why people have concerns, and I hear the jokes about a banker and a developer walking into City Hall. Um, but I will also argue that these three have given to marginalized communities
Hmm.
across our city when
Hmm.
folks wouldn't. These are three men who I know have stood in the gap for using their businesses to stand in the gap when racial injustice was running rampant in America and other businesses and corporations stood silent. And so, what I do believe about their character is that they are not doing this because they want to divide our community. They are not advocating for this because they want to hurt the working class or the vulnerable. I think they see a need and they are presenting a proposal on how to address it. And conversely, vote no has people on their side who I may not fully agree with all the time, but I don't believe that they are advocating against this because they don't love Wichita
Yeah.
and that they don't want nice things. I think they're questioning the process. I say all that to say it's important for us to remove our emotion, look at the facts, and learn how to respect the dignity and the humanity within people.
Absolutely. And the last thing about Wichita Forward is I just want to talk about why it exists.
Mhm.
So, there was a lot of studies done in Wichita over the years, over the course of decades, showing all these issues and problems. Can you talk about why Wichita Ford, a new nonprofit with these business leaders, came forward with this proposal and not the city?
Yeah, so, the city cannot advocate for a sales tax. That's
Oh,
why,
wow. I didn't know that
you don't
actually.
yeah, I mean, we have been told, and it has been cleared, no city staff can say, "Vote yes, vote no," and we are paid by the city. What we can do is educate and inform. Gets
Yeah.
kinda tricky when you're running a campaign, right, advocating for a
So
sales
explain that
tax.
process though. So anyone can come to the city and
Yeah.
say, "Hey, I want to put a sales tax on the vote for the special election, upcoming general." Is that how it's supposed to
Any
work?
group, nonprofit could have come before the city and said, "Here's our plan. Will you vote to give the community an opportunity to say whether or not they want this?"
So let me give you a scenario.
Okay.
This doesn't pass. There's no sales tax.
Mhm.
Do you think the no campaign should bring something to the table?
I think that there's certainly, that's certainly a great question to ask. I
Hmm.
would say that I think anybody who is watching this play out, if the answer is no, if the will of the community is no, I think the first thing people should be doing, whether you vote no or vote yes, is saying, "How do we come together and reconcile and work on a plan together?"
Absolutely. And that's the next thing is what are the options for some of these things that I'm going to be honest, don't sound optional. I don't think addressing homelessness should be cut. I don't think that's an option.
Mhm.
Public safety is very important, especially our fire stations. What are the options? Is it going to be budget cuts, bonds? Like what is the city going to have to look at?
And so that is exactly why I've asked the city manager to come up with a contingency plan because I believe our community deserves to know that. Our every single resident deserves to know what's on the other side of this thing.
Hmm.
We know what's on the other side if it's a yes, right? That plan has been laid out.
Hmm.
We've had lengthy discussions about guardrails,
Hmm.
and there's been lots of criticism, warranted criticism about the process, about the guardrails, about all the things. We don't know what the contingency plan is if the answer is no. And
Hmm.
that is really concerning to me because my time in Wichita has shown me that when the city is facing budget cuts, the first expendable community happens to be the marginalized, working class, and vulnerable, and that is not okay either.
Absolutely.
And so it's fine if you want to vote no, it's fine if you want to vote yes, but you deserve to know all the facts before making that decision. And I can tell you that we don't know a contingency plan right now. I will
Hmm.
tell you that as somebody who signed up to represent my district and to fight for this community, I'm going to do the work that's necessary, regardless of what the will of the body is because that's what I've been elected to do.
Yeah.
But I hope our community is ready to do that work as well.
Is there a timeline for that contingency plan? Would it by chance be ready before the election?
It would need to be ready by the time budget is voted on.
And what time is that?
So we have started budget discussions now. So July, August is when you'll see the city council talking about it out loud.
Okay, and so we should be able to see what the manager puts forth and
Yep.
see potentially some of the concerns or cuts that will need to be made
Hmm.
if we didn't vote for the sales tax. Now, if that happens, what are some of the things that absolutely need money this year that will potentially go away if we don't address their
Well,
concerns?
and keep in mind that the budget deficits are projected to start occurring in 2028 and 2029. So for the
Okay,
2027 fiscal year, we are projected to be okay.
okay,
And I also like adding this caveat is because I hate making people feel like the sky is falling.
yeah,
We have a really great finance team, and our finance team tends to budget a little bit more conservatively to ensure that we are more prepared, right? And
yep,
so we're saying a $4 million deficit, $8 million deficit. It probably won't look that heavy, but there will more than likely be a deficit that we face in 2028 and 2029 which will impact what we can do. And one of the immediate things to your point that I believe is not optional is Second Light.
yeah. That's what I've heard. Isn't like the operating budget each year is about 4 million. Is that
That's right.
accurate?
That's right.
And so, if that isn't met, what are some of the options that we as a community can do to potentially support this? Because I know there's probably thousands of people across Wichita that even if it was like a GoFundMe, they would support it,
That's
right?
right.
So, what are some of the last minute options that the city could potentially implement to support Second Light?
Yeah. We could vote to raise the mill levy.
Yeah,
Um,
super popular, by the way.
yeah, and I know that's an uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah.
Um, we somebody could bring up a sales tax to the city, and the council could vote on whether or not we will put that sales tax on the ballot. I will tell you that we can only do a certain amount of special elections per law. a year. And again, those special elections, if they're not done in the time frame of when an election is occurring naturally,
Mhm.
there is a cost associated with it.
Yeah.
And we did that this year to make sure that we find out how we need to move forward in time in alignment with the budget season. So we had the information we needed by then. The other thing is, I will be advocating for Second Light, and I will be asking our private sector to do whatever they can to support. And I hate that conversation too, because we do have a very generous private sector that gives through private philanthropy. But the reality is, and as somebody who has come from a nonprofit, folks feel like they are already competing for dollars from the private sector.
Mhm.
And so what happens when there's this mass effort to say, private sector, please give to Second Light? It is a pressing need, which I believe even our nonprofit sector would agree.
Mhm.
There does become a concern that is this going to take away from other
Absolutely.
important, meaningful nonprofits that have to do incredible work in our community? And if they don't do it, it creates more gaps in those other areas.
Mhm.
Then it's like a monopoly, right? Of like, then how do you fill up
Yes.
that gap?
So it seems like funds from the private sector is like a zero-sum game almost. So if you give more money to Second Light, you're gonna start taking away, things that help other areas of the community.
Yeah, well, and it's not a guarantee that it would take away funds from nonprofit sector, other agencies, right?
But it would be a lot to ask to give in
That's
addition to
right.
all that they've
And
already been
I've heard
doing.
that from leaders of our nonprofit agencies. They are really concerned about one, it's a moral thing and the right thing to help support our unhoused, right? Um, the other part of this is that if we do not fund Second Light, the private sector, I believe, Wichitans just have a heart. We're hard workers and we want to support our most vulnerable. And I
Mhm.
just can't imagine a world where the private sector does not step up and fund Second Light. The question then becomes, does that then mean that they might have to reduce their giving in other areas for other incredible nonprofit agencies doing great work? Our
Mhm.
nonprofit sector is really the backbone in many ways of um, a lot of work that is being done in the housing area, in the domestic violence area, in the crime reduction area, violence intervention area, and so we know that there's meaningful work happening in other places.
And one thing I wanted to bring up is, whenever you're voting on something like this, a great way to find out if this would work is just ask who else has done it.
Hmm.
So, a good example that's close to us is Oklahoma City.
Yep.
Oklahoma City has a something called a MAPS program, just a general investment fund that they voted on, and it barely passed about 20 years ago. A small 1% sales
Hmm.
tax. Now, 1% isn't small for everybody,
That's
but
right.
it was a lot of money, and they have seen over the course of 20 years $5 billion in economic impact, creating a tenfold return on their original investments. So much so, it's actually grown in popularity, and they keep voting in increasing numbers to keep it around.
Hmm.
It started at barely above 50, and now it's seeing somewhere along 70% support
Yeah.
along the community. And then also, in addition to that, communities around Wichita have been doing the same thing, but we are left out of that conversation.
We're the
So,
last city standing in our region to not do it.
yep,
Oklahoma City is a great example. I've been to Oklahoma City a few times. You can definitely tell that they've invested in themselves. I'll give you another interpretation. We're typically always about 10 years behind.
yeah,
And when we look at when Oklahoma City started, even the conversation, when we look at how they started the conversation, there are things that we can learn from Oklahoma City.
yeah,
But we also can see through the data, right? It barely passed the first time. Now it's garnered around 70% of voter support. It means that once they earned that trust, they worked hard to keep it. And that's
hmm,
been my commitment to the people, that once we earn the trust, it may not be March 3rd, but if we eventually get there, it's how do we keep it and make sure that taxpayers feel comfortable with what they are investing in and that they have a voice and a say. If the
hmm,
answer is no on March 3rd, we still need to be committed to rebuilding that trust, because what we do know is that we're behind in comparison to not just cities like Oklahoma City, we're behind in comparison to here locally and what other
yeah.
cities surrounding us have done.
I mean, a lot of people in the community will look see at Facebook and all these posts about Derby's adding this cool water park.
Yeah,
Goddard is expanding its commercial district, and we're like, well, what's going on in Wichita?
that's
Not
right.
much. And guess what? That's being funded through. We're only seeing growth because of stuff at the state level, like star bonds, but there's not much happening locally to invest in things for the community. And so, I think a good way to present this is: Are we okay with the status quo?
That's right.
If so, feel free to vote no. If we want to see progress at the cost of, a little bit of money out of some of the sales tax each month, then people should be voting yes.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm empathetic to both sides.
Absolutely.
I do have a personal opinion, but we'll keep this neutral here.
Yeah. Yeah.
But my hope is that because of this conversation, everyone feels a bit more knowledgeable going
Mm.
into the voting booth on March 3rd. But yeah, if this doesn't pass, I think it's still important to consider,
That's right.
what are our options? And I'm glad the city council is thinking about that. And I'm glad you are on it
Yeah.
to make sure all of that gets done.
Yeah, we have pressing needs. And again, my job in this election is to educate and inform, to make sure that misinformation is not being put out there, to correct any narratives that are not true. And I've also been trying to do a really good job of not fear mongering, but also being honest with the public about where
Yeah.
we are. Because again, they deserve to know that. And I think it's been part of the problem that the public has had with local government is the level of vulnerability and honesty and how we got here. Expenses have grown, revenues have not.
Mhm.
And um, if your answer is I'm a no, I respect that. That is the beauty of our democracy. I'm going to ask, what does our next steps look like to address these needs, and will you be willing to work with the council to meet
Mhm.
the moment? If you go into the voting booth and you're voting yes, I'm going to ask you, how are you going to work with us, with me, to rebuild trust from those who are just hurting because they don't trust local government? And how do we ensure that it's not a transactional, hey, let's build trust, but over the course of the 7 years that the sales tax exists, how do we continue to keep these conversations going and work with our community so they feel heard, seen, and valued in this?
Absolutely. After March 3rd, it's not done. So I encourage people to, before and after this vote, reach out to your city council member. You can
Yes.
find out who your council member is online. If you don't already know who it is, they have emails and numbers you can reach out to, make your voices heard. And, we just got to make sure we are trying to build a stronger community together.
Hmm.
And thank you again, Joseph, for this
Yep.
conversation.
Thank
Glad to
you.
have you on.
Thanks for having me. Can I add one more thing? If
Absolutely.
folks want to know more about this, they can go to wichita.gov/ballot question. That is going to have a wealth of information about the guardrails, about what you're going to see actually on your ballot. And if you have any questions reading that, please feel free to email me or shoot me a text. My cell phone number's out there. I'm happy to talk.
Well, thank you so much, Joseph, for
Thank you.
coming. Again, everyone, be informed and be prepared to have a plan to vote on March 3rd or vote early if you can. And let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens.
Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you.